C6 Bennett regretters rejoice because Kujou Sara has finally arrived after a long wait from her introduction in the Atk On quest. In my opinion, Sara is an extremely strong 4-star support that does good damage herself, but more importantly buffs your entire team. She shares a similar role to the only 6-star support Bennett, and while I do not believe she can ever replace him, she doesn't fall too far behind his support capability, which says a lot. That said, I do not think it is fair to only compare Sara to Bennett because she is a different character with a unique kit. She does have some downsides to her kit like any well-balanced character does, but in my opinion the strengths greatly outshine any weaknesses. Unless you simply don't enjoy Sara's playstyle, I think she comes close to a must-build character for a lot of people, especially with the recent difficulty spike in Abyss. In this video, we'll discuss Sara's kit and its nuances, her strengths and weaknesses, optimum playstyles, builds, and teams. My Sara is currently level 80 out of 90 with a level 90 sack bow and level 666 talents. It will take some time to really see Sara's full potential while we all farm the new weekly boss over the following weeks, so do keep that in mind. Without further ado, let's get right into it. Sara's normal and charge attacks are standard for bow users, and she has the same charge attack scaling as Fischl. While I typically do not level this skill on my support units, I did take it to 6 for Sara because she uses charge attacks to apply her attack buff, and the extra damage was worth the investment for me. Even with an ER build, my charge attacks are hitting around 5k. Her elemental skill is the ability that allows her to provide an attack buff to one party member and to battery her team. Much like how Fischl works, Sara's kit is centered around her elemental skill. When you cast this skill, she dashes back and gains crow feather cover, which lets her place her crow feather down with a charged shot. This will explode shortly after performing a charge shot and will provide an attack buff for 6 seconds to a character standing in the AoE when it explodes. Her first passive talent decreases the charging time on this charge shot by 60%, which is significant as you can see in the clip playing, and with her second passive talent, when the explosion hits an enemy, she will also provide flat energy to the team based on her energy recharge amount. There are some nuances to this skill that are important to understand to make full use of her kit. The first is that casting the skill doesn't actually do anything but allow her to place a crow feather. You have 18 seconds to do this, even though the skill is on a 10-second cooldown, and the cooldown starts when performing the skill and not when placing the crow feather. The second is that her Constellation 2, which automatically places a crow feather when she presses E, changes this skill quite a bit. First, the mini crow feather grants an attack buff and procs her second passive. That said, you still do not generate electro particles. So at Constellation 2, you still want to perform a charge shot most of the time. You will want to wait a few seconds to maximize attack buff uptime and proc her second passive twice as it is on a 3-second cooldown. And third, if you're running Sackbow at Constellation 2, the Sackbow passive will be applied when the first crow feather explodes. Her elemental burst has a very high damage multiplier, and coupling this with her skill, I believe makes her a very well-rounded character. Her burst deals a single large AoE attack, deals several consecutive AoE electro attacks which spread out and have a much lower multiplier, and activates her elemental skill attack buff and also procs her second passive talent. With a scaling of 737% at talent level 10 for the initial burst of damage, this attack hits very hard and has a good range of casting. If she was Pyro, Hydro, or Cryo, we would definitely be seeing some damage showcases. As far as constellations go, Sara is one of the few 4-stars that functions as a complete character at Constellation 0. That said, we did touch on Sara's second constellation, and while this isn't necessary to play this character, it is a nice quality of life upgrade. In my opinion, this constellation is useful because it allows you to get an attack buff up in situations that are not conducive to taking time to perform a charge attack. You still need to perform a charge attack to get energy particles, so it doesn't remove this requirement completely, but it does make this character much better, and she feels much less clunky to me at C2. This constellation also helps with the uptime on your attack buff and your battery potential, and is the strongest constellation to get for most players. Her C6, which gives electro characters 60% crit damage, is OP, but this does only work for some select teams with the small number of electro units in the game. Hopefully, we see some more strong electro characters before we move out of Inazuma. Her Constellation 1, which reduces skill cooldown by 1 to 2 seconds, and her Constellation 4, which provides some additional burst damage, are nice, but not game changers in my opinion. I want to quickly address strengths and weaknesses for Kujou Sara, as I'm seeing a lot of mixed reviews on this character, from calling her clunky and a worse Bennett to OP and a must build. These are just my thoughts, so take what I say with a grain of salt. Despite the fact that I make a lot of math-heavy guides, I would not consider myself a meta player and am much more drawn to characters for aesthetics and playstyle. As far as strengths go, here are my thoughts. She's a universal buffer that can transfer a huge amount of damage to other characters. Bennett is the only other character that transfers flat attack and does not provide an attack percent bonus. This alone makes her valuable. Her supportive and damage buffing capabilities are not locked behind constellations. C6 is pretty insane, but she's also very strong before Constellation 6. This makes her a strong long-term investment support. Her individual burst damage is very high and the AoE is very large. Like Bennett, her builds are flexible if used only as a buffer, as she just needs high base attack. Her attack buff is not gated by energy, and her battery capabilities are high. At 200% energy recharge and Constellation 2, she provides a flat 2.4 energy to the entire team twice per skill cooldown and once per burst, making her a better battery than Bennett and Fischl in specific comps. At Constellation 0 and 200% energy recharge, Sara will provide 12.6 energy to on-field electro characters and 5.4 energy to off-field non-electro characters every 10 seconds. This increases to 15 and 7.8 at Constellation 2. This actually puts her battery potential at Constellation 2 for on-field electro characters above a perfectly played Fischl below Constellation 6, but under the potential of Fischl at C6. She's still as good of, or a better battery than C6 Fischl for off-field electro units and any other element type. When we compare this to Bennett, who can spam his skill on a 4-second cooldown on average, Sara doesn't come close to Bennett's battery potential for on-field pyro characters. However, as a general battery, even with Bennett spamming his skill every 4 seconds, Sara wins. Most people are probably using Bennett's skill on a more reasonable 6-second cooldown, which closes this gap even more with her being a better battery for off-field pyro characters than Bennett, which says a lot. As for Sara's weaknesses, she feels clunky to play at Constellation 0 and can make team rotations less fluid. This is subjective, and higher skill cap players likely won't have an issue with her playstyle. I'm still trying to nail down rotations myself. Sara's attack buff will never reach the attack transfer potential of Bennett. Her attack buff is on the short side and only applies to a single character at a time, and she has to perform a charge attack to collect energy particles from her skill. Sara does not replace Bennett, but I do feel like her upsides do negate the few downsides she has. Honestly, if Bennett wasn't in the game, most of these wouldn't even be weaknesses. While Sara's attack buff duration is short at 6 seconds, many characters have abilities that snapshot and negate this downside, as the buff will be applied for their entire duration of their ability. On top of this, Bennett's attack buff is lost the second you leave the AoE. When you have to chase down enemies with characters that do not snapshot, Sara can be a better attack buffing option. With my thoughts on this character out of the way, let's discuss builds. I will showcase damage from a few different artifact sets, but otherwise we'll keep this section simple. When selecting the build to run for Sara, you need to consider how important the following are for you: Sara's battery capability, Sara's attack buff, and Sara's burst damage. Battery capability favors high energy recharge, attack buff favors high base attack weapons, and burst damage favors attack percent and crit stats in general. As a general rule of thumb, I would aim to build Sara with around 200% energy recharge due to her 80 burst cost and battering capability, and to invest in crit rate and crit damage due to her high burst scaling. If you find that you can spam your burst without high energy recharge, and you're not as worried about Sara's battery potential, you can invest in attack percent over energy recharge for more burst damage. I personally recommend you go for the highest base attack weapons available that add to either Sara's battery capability or burst damage. For 4-star weapons, my top recommendations are Sacrificial Bow, Alley Hunter, or Blackcliff Warbow. At higher talent levels, you'll be losing around 100 attack transfer by running a weapon like Favonius over these other options. Personally, I prefer Sacrificial Bow for the energy recharge substat and ability to reset your elemental skill cooldown. At Constellation 2, the Sac Bow allows you to buff 2 characters without performing a charge shot, which is great in stressful situations. Alley Hunter and Blackcliff will provide more damage for Sara and are great options if you can maintain burst uptime. I always recommend to balance your build with weapon choice when you can, and the same advice is applicable here. Any 5-star bow is strong on Sara because of the high base attack. At talent level 10, the 5-star options will provide around 84 additional attack buff for your team. Personally, I think Skyward Harp and Elegy for the end are the strongest options, with Skyward Harp increasing all of Sara's damage and providing the highest base attack of all bows in the game, and Elegy giving energy recharge to Sara as well as further buffing your team. The other 5-star bows are mostly focused on normal and charge attack damage and are mostly stat 6 on Sara. Artifacts for Sara are even more flexible than her weapons. I personally think her 2 best sets are 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate or 4-piece Noblesse Oblige if you're not using this on another character. I only have a single emblem set built at the moment, which is on Raiden Shogun, but would like to farm a second set for Sara in the future. Mixed sets of 2-piece Thundering Fury with 2-piece Gladiator or Noblesse also work fine here. Emblem of Severed Fate is her best set if you're building 200% energy recharge, but Noblesse also makes sense when running Sara mostly as a team buffer. For artifact main stats, I'm guessing most players will want to run an energy recharge Sands, but if you have enough energy recharge to get your burst up, you can run an attack percent Sands for extra damage. Then prioritize electro damage in the goblet slot and crit rate or crit damage for the circlet. For artifact substats, I would prioritize crit rate and crit damage first, followed by attack percent and energy recharge depending on what you're lacking. I personally tested builds consisting of 4-piece Emblem, 4-piece Noblesse, and 2-piece Thundering Fury with 2-piece Gladiator. All of these builds use an energy recharge Sands and the Sacrificial Bow and maintained around 130% crit damage. The damage potential difference between these sets is not huge. The single target damage over 20 seconds was actually highest for 2-piece Gladiator with 2-piece Thundering Fury, while Emblem gives the highest burst damage. Against multiple targets, the Emblem set is the clear winner because her burst can hit multiple enemies, but does not win out by a huge margin. To close the video out, let's discuss teams that Sara slots into well. C6 Sara is designed to be run with Electro, DPS, or burst supports. Of these, Keqing, Raiden Shogun, and Beidou are all very good choices. In some ways, Sara feels like an indirect buff for Electro Keqing. While Keqing doesn't really benefit much from Sara's battery potential, her attack buff is still very welcome, and at C6 she will outperform Bennett in most circumstances. Raiden and Beidou are both primarily burst supports that deal most of their damage in their burst window. Unfortunately, neither of their burst snapshots, so you can lose the buff during their burst duration. That said, Raiden's initial burst damage is massive, and the duration is short enough to not be too negatively impacted. As discussed, Sara has a similar electro battery potential to Fischl and slots very well into the support slot with Beidou. Since Beidou's burst persists off field, you can also reapply the buff during its duration. I'm really enjoying running both Sara and Raiden to support Eula. Both of them are there to battery and buff Eula during and outside of her burst window. Eula unfortunately has another burst that does not snapshot, so she does lose out on the attack buff during her burst explosion, which is a major downside to this team. Outside of these teams, I think Sara generally works great in any quick swap team, especially alongside supports that can snapshot their skill or burst like Xiangling and Rosaria, or alongside DPS units that apply their burst in a single short damage instance like Hu Tao, Diluc, or Child. She actually synergizes very well with Hu Tao, as Hu Tao and Bennett have anti-synergy, and I think this has been a slept on pairing so far. That's all I got for you guys today. If you guys made it this far, thank you so much for watching. If you found this video helpful and informative, please consider leaving a like and subscribing, as it really helps out the channel. I make Genshin Impact videos just like this one every single week. I'll see you soon for the next video. Peace.